All right, Click Bishop. Thanks for taking some time out of your day and being on here.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you for having us on, Jeff.
So you've been in Alaska since statehood. You're a third generation gold miner. You helped build the pipeline. Those are some serious Alaska check marks. Why did you get into politics?
I I didn't. It got into me. Meaning I ran my union's apprenticeship program for 20 years, the operating engineers, and had the best job in Alaska, I thought, and without a doubt. And then a woman by the name of Sarah Palin got elected governor and called and left a message on our answering machine for me to call her. So I did, and long story short, I with some soul searching and some prayer, took her up on her offer. She said, "You need to do your public service."
Yeah.
And so went to Juneau in oh 06 in December. Anyway, got on the payroll oh 07 to January, and the rest is history. Worked for her and Governor Parnell, and so almost 6 years in the Department of Labor and as commissioner, and put together the pipeline training plan, the gas line training plan, and it's subsequently been updated through the Walker administration. And but I had worked for two other governors pro bono, Tony Knowles and Governor Murkowski, on both of their gas line plans, if you will. And why is that? That's because I know the labor side of the street. So, yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's how I got into politics, and then I retired as commissioner, and I was asked by some senators to run for the Senate, redistricting, 2010 decennial census, and they come out with a new set of maps in 12 and ran for the Senate. And so 12 years in the Senate, and some, people had been after me over the years to take a shot at running for governor, and hardest decision I ever made because my Senate district is a lot of family and a lot of friends, and I loved it. But hopefully I've got a opportunity to serve them again and the rest of Alaskans. So yeah,
Mhm. You represented a large swath of interior Alaska,
sure.
Canada, almost to Norton Sound.
Yep.
How did that experience help prepare you to address the myriad issues of both city and rural life?
Well, I've got a I think I've got a without a doubt, I've got a good, deep understanding of rural Alaska. My wife's people, they come from over on the Yukon, and as a working person, well, let me go back to how did I go to school in Ketchikan? You're gonna
Mm,
ask yourself.
okay.
And my dad was a superintendent for Green Construction Company, and we worked all over Alaska. They had a Southeast division that was headquartered in Juneau, and so there was a lot of work in Southeast in the '60s. So I got to see the Panhandle, if you will, as a child, and then the Alaska Highway and rural Alaska. Did rural airports down on the lower Yukon, and worked all over the state. Following my dad, and then I did the same thing in a lot of the same communities 20 years later as an adult. So that's I'm very well versed urban versus rural.
Mm,
And you're right, my old Senate district that I was fortunate to represent, if it was a state, it was the third largest state in the union.
mm,
And you
it's
are
crazy.
correct.
Mm.
Yeah, it is.
So you've seen a lot of Alaska. I guess romanticize a lot of us romanticize that Alaska. We've always had these arguments about what to do with resources and how much we should extract. But it seems like now the proliferation of the internet and social media has kind of changed the dynamics. You mentioned that you worked for Palin and you worked for the last Democratic governor, Tony Knowles. Were things a little bit more cordial between the Republicans and Democrats back then?
So,
Is it more
le
divisive now, or what's the general feeling like?
oh, so I just wanna be clear. I work for Tony Knowles in pro bono.
Okay.
for his administration because his gas line was "My Way or the Highway."
Mm.
That was their theme in '99, and so that was pro bono work, but I did help his administration form what was now the Alaska Workforce Investment Board. It was called the Alaska Human Resource Investment Council, then spun off the, AWIB board. But to answer your question, the social media, in my opinion, I grew up watching Neil Armstrong take the first step on the moon in Tongass Apartments on the 11th floor on a
Mm.
black and white TV, right?
Awesome.
And and I don't I'm a student of history. My mother always said I was born 100 years too late. I'd been better served coming over the Chilkoot Pass in 1898 with the rest of the Stampeders, but I really believe that. I grew up with Walter Cronkite, Huntley, Brinkley, that genre of news and a quote I like to use is it's a Lyndon Johnson quote, and you'll remember he didn't run for reelection, and it was because it was a Walter Cronkite broadcast one night, and he famously said it was on the Vietnam War, and he said, "When I've lost Walter Cronkite,
Mm.
I've lost the electorate."
Mhm.
So and consequently, he didn't run for a second term, and Richard Nixon was, right, the president, and so there you go. So, I believe I believe it has definitely changed, we used to we were doing polling in the Senate majority over the years, and we put these survey questions together, and our IT resident expert, if you will, said, "Click, people got the attention span of 9 seconds." A goldfish has got more attention span than a human does now, and then I heard another term. Shannon and I were doing putting together a film, and a guy used a term called doom scrolling.
Right.
They just set up and doom scroll, and I'm going, "Okay." So, I I really believe that it has changed. The internet has changed social media, and I'm not and it's done a lot of good things, but I don't know if it's done I think it's had the negative effect on politics.
Mhm. It
Really do.
it disincentivizes working together, and, it seems like there are members who have been a part of bipartisan cooperation, and they haven't seen it as a negative, and that's kind of unfortunate because Alaska is it's so diverse, and we need conversations, we need bipartisan support and agreement, but if it's if people don't if it's not incentivized, then people aren't gonna go with it. So do you how, when you were working with people across the aisle, like, was that received well? Was that just kinda how things were done? And how do you think that would work going forward?
Well, I think, my the one man crusades went out in the 12th century.
Mm.
And I'm like I said, I'm 68 years old, be 69 in July, and I go back and I've studied history, and I don't have that piece of paper right in front of me, but prior, back in this I go back to the Constitution and the Constitutional Convention at Signers Hall in Fairbanks, right? 1955. And I were in some of the broad sweeps, if you will. Fairbanks got the university, the capital stayed in Juneau, the bush in Fairbanks and Southeast always stuck together, and I'm still subscribed to that kind of methodology, mentality, if you will, and, there wasn't but 165,000 people in the state, I don't believe, in 1964, and so, yeah, I have seen the state grow, but people gotta I had a document that showed all the bipartisan coalitions since statehood,
Mm.
and there was quite a few of them, but they had to work together, right? Because nobody had a clear dominant, if you will, a majority, and John Butrovich, his name's on a building here in Fairbanks at the campus. And at one time before Lyman, Hoffman's tenure now upholding the record, he was the longest serving, I believe, Republican senator at that time. And Senator Butrovich, he caucused with, bipartisan coalitions. And so I work well. I work with you from the other side where I can work with you, and where I can't work with you, I respectfully can't work
Mm,
with you, right?
mhm,
I don't go scorched earth, like is so much today, and with sound bites and et cetera, because politics, Juno, it's all that building revolves around relationships, right?
mm.
And my memory's pretty long, really
Yeah,
long.
yeah.
And it does what's the purpose of going scorched earth on individuals, right? Because you don't know in the next organization how it's going to look.
Mhm,
Right? And I'll use the analogy I used to use with my apprentices. And I used to do orientation at the school with the first year apprentices, and and I would say, always treat people with respect. Just because you're standing on top of the ditch, you know what I mean? And you're the supervisor this week and on this job, I said, treat your crew with respect. Because when you get this job's completed and you go back to the hall and sign up and on the books and you go out on the next job, you might be in the bottom of the ditch
mhm.
and the guy that was in the bottom's on the top of the ditch. Just how the mop flops,
Yeah.
in the construction business. So treat people with respect. I've always done that. And I don't, I like to use my analogy. I don't make anybody's cornflakes soggy, and because you don't know, and you could need somebody in a future organization to move your legislation.
Mhm.
Right.
One of the most contentious issues, if not the most contentious issue, is about revenue. In 1988, there were 2 million barrels going through the pipeline. Today, it's about 500,000. Increasing production is not just a matter of turning a knob so that more oil flows. So, what can we do about production to help generate revenue so it's not
Oh,
just coming from our investments in the perm fund?
good question, and I'm glad you jumped right on that one. You're right. And you gotta have a full understanding of the oil and gas business. So, I went to work right out of high school, at 18 years old. Well, not quite 18, but almost 18. But anyway, I went to work right out of high school on taps. And the North Slope, if you've never been there, it's not West Texas. There's not a road through every quarter section. And West Texas, you can pull in with a rig. Just watch Landman. That's all you got to do is watch Billy Bob Thornton and Landman. That's just exactly how it rolls down there, right? And it takes days to move a rig on the North Slope. It takes it takes years to make from discovery to first production if you don't get a challenge and getting all your permits and to get final investment decisions from your investors. It takes about, on a good field, it takes 10 years
Mm,
from discovery to first production, right? And because it's expensive, and the Arctic is a challenging environment. We've lost 40 plus field days since I started working up there in the 70s because of climate change, and it's real,
mm,
right? And what do I mean by that? We used to get tundra permits, into November, 1st of December. Now you're not getting tundra permits until January.
mm,
Right? So, when you're made a discovery and you gotta build a pipeline and you gotta get you gotta have a foot of frost, you gotta have a foot of cover to be able to get over the tundra. You gotta build your ice roads. You gotta mine your gravel. You gotta put it into your infrastructure. So you've compressed your timeline. And so it takes more people faster to get the same amount of work done that we did, 40 years ago. So the good news is for Alaska, and February 28th should be a wake up call to everybody. And I'm kind of shifting gears here a little bit. Two exciting discoveries. You got Pika, which is a Santos project, and you got Quokka. That's another lease on state land, and then Willow, and that's a ConocoPhillips play. But when when those fields in their field development is in full production, there's estimates that we'll be back up to 750,000 barrels a day, right? And but with the president's executive order of 14153 to expand lease sales in the NPRA, and we saw a good one here a month and a half ago, and then just hold that thought. So I want to go to February 28th when the events started taking place in Iran. So I don't know if you do like me, but I look at the oil price in the morning. I look at it at night. There's a website that I look at and read the oil and gas news globally. So so the oil supply is choked to the tune of about 25%, and it's right now, and it's really hurting Southeast Asia. So I had a friend of mine that was going to go to Korea, and but they said don't come right now. We're in a bind here with our fuel. We're asking people to stay home, use public transportation, that kind of thing. Now, closer to home, we are really suffering out west. And I mean, the Yukon River's in good shape for fuel deliveries, but out west, up to Kobuk and other areas, fuel it has been quoted at $12 a gallon.
Wow.
So we had a refinery here in Fairbanks, and it closed here. Oh, I can't. I'm going on. It's over 10 years ago, and and something that I want to get back to is energy security. We talk a lot about food security, very important here in Alaska, but I want to talk about energy security for Alaska, the United States, and Southeast Asia, because we have the rule of law here in Alaska and in the United States, and I want to fully engage in taking care of ourselves. I'd like to be able to. I wish that refinery would have never left, and
Mm.
then Western Alaska wouldn't have been in a bind. And oil production was part of it. There was other issues with, which I won't get into for this podcast, but energy security is very important. But we should always think about taking care of ourselves first, Alaskans first,
Mm.
right? And because our oil refined products for Anchorage International Airport, a lot of Western Alaska, where does it come from? Comes from Southeast Asia.
Mm.
And so they're down on supply, and I haven't read the news. I've been on the road. Is the war have they got an agreement with Iran this afternoon that I've missed? I don't
Not
know.
that I've seen.
Okay, so even if it, comes to pass, and I hope it does soon, it's gonna take a while to get that production back up because there's been some damage to some of the producing fields, right? So, yeah.
So how do we help become energy secure?
So, well, we don't have a shortage of oil on the North Slope. We've got to me, if I was the president of the United States, I'd bring all assets to bear to streamline and expedite under national security our development of our North Slope assets. You know, we got a heavy oil formation there and on the North Slopes called Agnew, and there's 22 billion barrels in place. Now, that sounds like a big number, and it is a big number, but the key number when you're hearing forecasts from, like, the United States Geological Survey and others is it's what is economically recoverable, right? And right now, that UGNU formation with the technology that we have, and we got a oil research center here at the university has been working with the North Slope producer to I call make the secret sauce. It's a polymer that helps unlock that heavy oil and make it easier to pump, right? So right now they think they can recover a billion plus barrels, right? And but as technology improves, hopefully that number goes up. And there's a very aggressive drilling season in that same formation that Santos and Conoco have hit at 5,000 feet. All that Prudhoe Bay first discovery oil was at 12,000 feet. What they call in the industry, they went all the way to the basement
Mm.
in the reservoir and hit the that was an elephant field in Prudhoe Bay and Kaparic. But now they drilled right through that. At 5,000 feet is where this, and it's 180 to 190-foot pay zone, right? They drilled right through that and missed it. Well, we had a guy that was a geologist for one of the majors up there come back in, a wildcatter, and made this discovery, and it's been a game changer on the North Slope. But that trend line looks to run back to the east towards Point Thompson, and that would be good news. So there is a aggressive exploration that's going to happen next winter, both east and west. So you got to put a drill bit in a reservoir to make a discovery.
Mhm.
So
What
yeah.
about natural gas? And there's some news about, a gas pipeline. So what about that as a viable option for more revenue? And how do we incentivize this sort of production or even pipeline building without too much in the form of subsidies or tax breaks for the corporations that are drilling?
Well, that's another good question. I'll say that just to give a little background on gas on the North Slope, people saying we've been trying to develop it since 1977, but it goes back further than that. I got a document on the first gas off the North Slope was proposed project was in 1955 from the Umiat oil field. That's 100 miles south of Prudhoe Bay, and the Navy did a lot of work out there during World War II and subsequent years up until the 50s, and they wanted to bring natural gas to Fairbanks down to the rail belt out of the Umiat field. So that's how long we've been talking about getting gas off the North Slope, just to frame the conversation. But so I worked in the pipe yard after construction, and we were sending all the equipment back to Moses Lake, Washington for a big auction. And my superintendent came to us after lunch and says, Click, you guys are going to be here for another 2.5 years because the gas line pipe's coming in 6 months
Hmm.
in 1977. And so you had that one. So there's been one, two. We've tried to get gas off the slope starting in 1977, and it's a good thing that we did it because if you would have started selling gas off the North Slope in '77, you would have stood a good chance to blow down your gas cap because we're cycling 8.5 billion cubic feet every day, every 24 hours, and that keeps that reservoir pressure up
Mm.
to pump more oil, and oil is way more valuable than natural gas. It's a good fuel source, there's no doubt about that, but, TAPS was built, and then when we built it, they were looking at, well, if we're gonna get about 9 billion barrels, right? And we just hit a milestone here, what, a couple months ago, and we're at 19 billion barrels produced,
Hmm.
right?
That's a
So
lot.
it is a lot, and so and a lot more to get. So it's a challenge. I mean, if it was, you know, it I have not because 'cause I've been gone for, what, a year and a half, and Shannon's had me stretched out like a ice worm from Cordova, you know, all over the state going, 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 and going. So I follow it, but I'm not into the details like I was. But I can tell you that it's got to be economic. And I do I want a gas line? Absolutely. To frame it in a nutshell, who doesn't, right? Especially for in-state use and export. But I want to make sure that it's economic for Alaska, and it's not a I want it to be an asset to the treasury, not a liability, so
Mhm.
there you go.
Yeah. It seems like if we look back in history, and again, it could be a romanticized view, that there were some just incredible projects that were done, and they were innovations that really helped our lives. But now it just seems like with overruns that are expected, misappropriation of funds, infrastructure failures, there's all these different reasons why today is not a good day for massive projects. And obviously, Alaska is not California, but if you point to California and the high speed rail project or the EV charging stations, it just seems like states and the federal government are not good at big projects. Do you think that it would be economical to put in a gas pipeline at this point? It seems like something that we probably could have done in the 70s or 80s because it seemed like we were just better at getting stuff done, and now I don't know, maybe it's cynical, maybe I'm off here. What do you got?
No, you're not off. I mean, major mega projects overrun, period. TAPS, right? Initial contract estimates was a billion to $2 billion. And what was the final bill when we got done with TAPS? 9 billion.
Yeah.
Okay, so I asked a question. It's Senate Finance. It's on the record. There's a slide in the record. I asked the Senate Finance. So because as a legislature, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the Treasury and to the people of Alaska. So pipeline construction, that's part of my background, right? And so I asked the question one day at Senate Finance to the consultants. I said, look, I need you to bring me a slide that shows the percentage of cost overrun on every LNG project on the planet that's $1 billion and above. Okay. And so it was about, I don't know, a week and a half later, they brought the slide to the Senate Finance table. And the bigger the project cost, the larger the percentage of overrun.
Mhm.
So on that slide, I think the largest project overran 45%. I took a picture of it. I got it on my phone, but I won't spool it up and take the time to be. I'm accurate. It's just 45% overrun. So big projects overrun. That's just there's no two ways about it.
There was an article in the Alaska Beacon that cites that could be between 46 billion and 57 billion dollars for the Gasline project, which is pretty wild. But of course, like it's a long time after the 70s, and so your prices are going to be much different. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes going forward.
Yeah, right. So
As far as the economics of things and the financials, in order to get Alaska out of its financial problems, there's on one side it's cut, on the other side it's tax, but it's got to be way more nuanced than that. So Alaskans like the perm fund dividend. We like not having state sales tax. We like not having a state income tax. But the financial strains on have hurt infrastructure and education pretty much everywhere. So how do we go, or where do we go from here as far as addressing our financial ails?
So, on I'm gonna talk about capital spend for education, right? Deferred maintenance. And you said you taught school, is that
Yeah, yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you know what the capital deferred maintenance is.
Go for it.
It's over 300 million, right? And now, to be fair, Senator Stedman and Senator Hoffman, when they were co-chairs back in the 2007, 8, 9 timeframe, I was in the administration. That list was pretty high then too. It was over several hundred million, I believe. And we were, had a surplus, and I believe they took that list to 0 in 1 year
Mm.
and cleaned the list off. And it wasn't but several years later, and boom, here you are, the list is growing again. So how do you do that? Well, there's a line item in the I don't have my revenue sources book in front of me, but there's an account called the Public School Trust Fund. And something that I wanna do is work with the legislature and our administration, if we're fortunate enough to get there, and it's a half of a percent of rents and royalties on oil and gas and mining and minerals, etcetera. So the fund balance in there is not quite $1 billion, but I wanna work with lawmakers to increase that. And I don't know what the number is yet, right? Is it another half a percent? Is it a percent and a half off of royalties? Because as we're coming into the next, what I call, I'll just say from my words, we've got an increase in production coming,
Right.
and I want to try to increase that multiplier. So to help with education funding, both the capital and the operating side inside the classroom. So we definitely need more money into the career and tech ed side of the education system. I'm a voc ed guy. CTE is the correct verbiage today, but you know, you as a teacher, and I don't know what if you're high school or grade school. I'm sorry if I didn't catch that, but back when I was working it hard, 75% of the kids that graduated high school needed to go on to a 2-year AA degree or an apprenticeship route, right? And the other 25% need to go to college, right? And personally, I'd like to see more engineers
Right.
going to college. I was able to help the university double the number of undergraduates when I was at the Department of Labor by RSAing money to the mining, engineering, and civil program here in the UA system. But so there's a couple of ideas on how to raise more funds for education and then live within our means and keep growing the permanent fund. So I'm not going to talk about history, woulda, shoulda, coulda, but
Right.
we're 86, 87 billion, get it up to a billion. I know Senator Stubman and I had talked about, you hit that magic number of 100 and your POMV you're drawing 4.5 to 5 billion a year. Your operating budget is north of 5 of general fund monies, and then yeah, and be efficient. There's not a lot left to cut. You can be
Right.
more efficient. You can be more efficient, and there's some areas where we can be more efficient, and but we've cut that thing to the bone, and you're not gonna find there's not $800 million of waste, fraud, and abuse in the budget anywhere. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing that we've been talking about down here. Our financial issues are made worse by some financial decisions locally, but then when you look statewide, that it's not just a catch a can school district issue all across the state. You have school closures and the term right sizing had been thrown around for a little bit, and that was in the process of happening. And then you have maybe enrollments down, but then you have inflation. And so, like you said, it just seems like we're cut down the bone and we're going to be losing a lot of teachers. And so class sizes are going to go up and our offerings might suffer. And that's the problem when you can offer a robust curriculum for kids. And I have some outstanding students that are seniors this year, and some of their favorite classes are also the trades. Like, they're gonna go to college and they wanna be engineers or doctors or nurses or whatever, but they really enjoy the shop class. They really enjoy the auto tech classes, and so it just really prepares this kid for adult living across the board rather than just for college. And so to have that cut, reduced, that's a pretty tough thing. So hopefully we can get this figured out.
Yeah, and shop classes aren't cheap.
No.
You know, your consumables, are expensive, your oxyacetylene, your welding rod, your all your gas, supplies, your metals, is same for lumber, and I'm glad to hear your students that are wanting to go to a four-year degree or something still are interested in the trades because a tradesperson, and I tell kids this all the time, and especially when I was doing outreach and recruitment for our apprenticeship program statewide, I always encouraged higher education. I grew up in a state before oil. In my trade, it was a 100-day season in the interior, right? Construction season, and we made good wages, and you had to get it and make it, but you didn't have a Prudhoe Bay to go to
Mhm.
in the winter, right? So, and that's my dad said something to me years and years ago as a young person. He says, "In this state, pre-oil," and I think it's just as true today, is you gotta be a jack of all trades and master at none, meaning at least your four-year degreed engineer with a shop class in high school can change a doorknob
Mhm.
or change oil in his automobile, you know what I mean? Because you're not gonna get AI to do that for you. You still has gotta have somebody to be able to do the hands-on work, and tradespeople, you're never out of a job. You used to when there was a lot of printed newspapers, you pick up a newspaper and look, and the help wanted section, and I always encourage people, learn how to weld. I mean, mechanics and welding, you could pick up a newspaper in any community, and there's always a help wanted for a welder,
Mhm.
right? And you know, I'd say how many welders they need to catch a can shipyard right now. How many electricians, how many plumbers, how many, the skilled trades. I bet if you had a skill set, you could walk in there and go to work tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, having it so close too. When I lived in California out of college for a little bit, and there was such a detachment between like the trades and or just the different economies, the different levels. Whereas here, like kids, you go by, people who were from logging families, people who are in the trades, someone who works at Vigor, all these people, and you see how close it is and the value of it. It's super important. So it's not that one is better than the other, it's they all complement each other, and you have to have all those elements in order to have a good functional community.
Hey, you hit the nail on the head, took the words right out of my mouth. It takes all kinds to make the world go round.
What about fishing? Interior Alaska, definitely for subsistence living, fishing is critical.
Yeah.
Here in Southeast Alaska, it's a massive industry. So, what are your plans to support fisheries?
Oh, man, you need another we need to know, can we just do another podcast on fish? Because I can't clear my throat in 30 minutes on that issue. I I'll be brief, and I would like to come back and do another podcast on fish to get into that conversation with you, and I can be brief. When there's I said this at an outdoor council, and it's streaming out there somewhere. Shannon could tell you how to find it. I can't. But I said, when there's a fish, a salmon steak, or a halibut steak, or a moose steak in every skillet, everybody's happy. But then you come up here in the interior where we're on a 7-year moratorium. That's a full life cycle on king salmon, and that's ingrained in that's cultural, and it goes back generational here, going to fish camp and whatnot. We can't fish, right? And because we're trying to rebuild the run so we can have a subsistence season, right? And yeah, it's a deep subject, I'm a firm believer in following the science. I'm a firm believer in the traditional knowledge as well. My mother-in-law used to tell me when I was a young man, "Click, the cotton's blowing off the trees. The king salmon are coming."
Mm,
Those kinds of things, right? And that traditional knowledge is just it's important as well. You can't snub the traditional knowledge of the people who've been living on the land for 10,000 years here either.
mhm.
But I'm a firm believer in following the science. I'm very pragmatic on this issue, and a 9-second Facebook post isn't gonna solve the problem, and if there was a easy button, somebody would have pushed it a long time ago. So, I think I'll just stop right there, and if you
Yeah.
at some point in time, if you wanna have a conversation about fish, love to have that conversation.
I'll move on to another topic that's probably an 8-second Facebook post could probably solve this one. What about cost of living and home availability?
Oh, man, so it's expensive. I cost of living is energy prices are killing everybody right now, right? And that's probably the biggest driving factor. You're pretty fortunate there. Can I ask you, Jeff, what's your kilowatt hour at your meter for your home?
It cost me about, I think, $250 a month, and it's been a little bit more expensive because we have a greenhouse and we're raising some chicks, and there's some other things that are costing there. But yeah, we can heat our house. We have heat pump, and it's about $100 a month or so. Usually, when we're not high energy in the summer.
Come to Fairbanks, we're in the dead of winter when it's anywhere from 450 to 600.
Yeah, I,
So,
I got a buddy who lives in Esther, and he talks about that a lot. And it's
yeah. So that's what that's what I want to solve, and we can do that. Are we going to do it overnight? No. But energy is another whole. I'd love to talk to you more about energy as well. But energy is the biggest driver here in the interior and in the bush. It's expensive to build. I know 4 years ago we were in Nome and it was about $750 square foot. Right? What's your barge window in Nome? Your barge window's from June-ish, and your last barge used to have to be headed south by the October the 15th, so barge freight's expensive. It is expensive, but their affordability is that's an issue as well.
Mhm.
These fuel prices are hurting everybody's food bills right now, right?
Yeah. What are you most proud of from the time that you've served, and what do you want to take into the governor's mansion if you get elected?
No, I wanna take 20 years worth of experience in personal relationships of knowing where I can bring a cabinet together that I'm just gonna I'm a very humble person, but I can bring an all-star cabinet to that administration. I know to run how the 3rd floor should be ran with a I said this the other day, I got asked this question. I said, "You're a first term governor, any governor, I don't care, first term, second term, you got to come. You're five solid people joined at the hip in your administration. If you want to get kicked off on the right foot with the legislature, is you got to have a good chief of staff.
Mm,
You have to have a good deputy chief of staff. You have to have a good legislative director. You have to have an outstanding OMB director. And lastly, a boards and commissions person, outstanding. And those 5 people have to be joined at the hip, notwithstanding your commissioners, right? And and I like to tell I had a governor call me one time. He said, "Click, what do you look for in a commissioner of labor?" And so I told him, what you look for, and I said, "What you don't want is the person that's wanting the job.
right.
You want the person you gotta go chase and do your best sales pitch to get them on board, and yeah.
I like
So
the story of Jay Hammond and how he didn't. want to be, let alone think he would win, so he was just able to be himself and going against, some of these big figures, and he ends up being a pretty popular
Oh,
contender.
I voted for him twice. But, I happen to know a friend of mine, there was a deputy chief of staff and one of his chiefs of staff, and I think I'm a lot like him in and of the fact that they had to almost hog time to get him in a suit to go out for a press conference because 'cause he'd be in his office in just his wool pants and a sweater and that kinda thing, you know what I mean? And I had a chance to visit with the governor on several occasions after he was out of office, and, yeah, I really enjoyed visiting with him. Yeah.
Whereas Alaska in 10 years, it's hard not to look right now at diminishing fish and looking at our education and infrastructure and not be somewhat pessimistic. So, where are we at in, well, maybe 4 years? Where's Alaska at?
Well, I think, I'm the eternal optimist. I can be standing in it clear up to my nose, and it's still a good day. And, as somebody that's my psyche, that's how I'm raised, and right, but with the oil discoveries and on the slope and production any day on Pika, and then Quokkas, that'll be the next one, and Willow coming online. Those are positives. Is from a mining industry standpoint, we've got 6 major producing mines in the state, and we need 6 more, our lieutenant governor, Greta, she comes from a resource development background, and so wanna tag team that, and we need 6 more mines, we just don't need 6, we need 6 more, and Alaska is the most underdiscovered, underexplored province in the United States, and I wanna work towards, expanding that.
Mhm. What excites you most about your team and your staff right now?
Oh, just the caliber of people that's, on staff and the volunteers that are just standing at the ready and we getting them harnessed and getting them pulling in the right direction. I've been eh, I'm a policy geek, believe it or not. You know what I mean? I get pretty focused on the policy, and I guess that's from my years of being in the legislature. But I was that way in my old job too. I would when I ran the apprenticeship program, I believe it or not, I started my succession planning on leaving my old job at the training trust, about 3 years before I knew I was gonna execute on this date. I started putting the pieces together, right? And so I'm a long range thinker in that respect. I'm bullish on Alaska. I think you get the right administration in place that can work with the, legislature. I'd just like to say something about vetoes. Nobody's asked us about vetoes on any of these. Vetoes, it's a tool, right? But to me, I look at the veto pen kinda like you've been in a hotel or a building and it says "Fire," in case of fire, break glass, right? And I'm somebody that will work with you as hard as I can work to find some compromise that we can both agree on, the administration and the legislature, so we don't have to break the glass.
Mm. Yeah, I read a transcript from an interview with, Governor Hammond, and he didn't want to sign the legislation that was getting rid of the income tax, but
Mhm.
because it was so popular, he didn't veto it, and that was kind of the self-awareness of kinda what the people wanted, and, you can debate whether or not that was a good decision, bad decision. There was so much money from the oil at that point, it didn't look like we needed that extra bit of revenue, but to look around and be self-aware and see what other people are doing and it takes a that also is leadership, not just doing what you feel like doing.
Yeah, well, it's sometimes it can be when you're a chief executive, it could be the loneliest job in town. I just rewatched, I'm a history nut, as I've already said once, but I just rewatched Churchill the other night. Man, that was the loneliest guy on the planet there for a period of time in 1940, right?
Yeah.
how would you like to been in his shoes or, Zelensky in this day and age, but you know, that's real leadership.
Mhm. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'd like to say thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that
Yeah,
I would say the same thing to you. Appreciate you coming on, and, yeah,
and
it would be some of these things are so complex, like, it would be impossible to address these things without, doing a bit of a series, so maybe later
right.
in the summer, something like that, as we get closer, we can kinda hammer down some more details.
Absolutely, and we'll be in Ketchikan for the Blueberry
Okay.
Festival,
Yeah.
and
We'll be there for Blueberry Festival. Wouldn't miss it for the world.
Awesome.
and and I hope, that I can shake your hand and we can meet face to face.
Yeah, that's, the opening weekend of deer season, so
Uh-huh.
but,
Okay,
we'll
I'm
see.
to I'm toast. I'm toast. You already I got I got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my wife really, wants to get out and, she didn't get a deer last year, so we'll see, but I'm not really sure. It's the first weekend in August, and last year, the first was on that Saturday, I think, so but yeah, I mean, it's a long season. We got time.
How's the king salmon fishing going down there right now?
We don't have any now, it's closed until, the 15th. It opens up. It's a hatchery. The terminal run opens on the 1st, but it's in a very, very limited area for the terminal run, so outside waters, it opens up sooner, and you can get your fish there, but inside
So,
waters, all those fish that are going up the Unic and those other rivers to Canada, they let them by first.
I caught a 25-pound king in the Derby there in Ketchikan. I didn't even make the board when I was a kid.
Yeah, yeah, there when I first moved back here, because I grew up on Prince of Wales Island and moved back to Ketchikan when I was or in 2013, and it was the last couple years of the King Salmon Derby, and then because of it used to be during Memorial Day weekend,
Mhm.
but because of the populations, they don't open the season until after the 15th. So then they changed it to a silver salmon derby in the late summer, and it's weird to be kinda living through that transition. The fishing on the outside of Prince of Wales, those outside waters are still pretty good, but the
Mm,
fish are smaller, there's fewer of them, and you have those emergency closures sometimes or the changing of the regulations, so all of a sudden, someone who's booked their ticket to come up, they can't keep a king salmon or, it's pretty tough.
right, right. Well, Jeff, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Please share. If you found today's conversation useful, you can go deeper with my writing on Substack. That's where I expand on these ideas from the show, share essays, reporting, and things I'm thinking about in real time. You can find it at From the 49th on Substack. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.